Hello everyone! Sorry for the delay, we had a few folks that were in transit, but we're all good, we're all here now, and welcome to a very special episode of Critical Role. We have a number of members of our party that are on vacation this week, so as opposed to continuing a climactic endpoint of a long 11 to 12 week story arc, we're gonna go ahead and hold off a week and have them return next week to pick up where we left off just after the battle with the big bad beholder, Kavarn the Mad. However, this week what we're going to be doing is essentially a little workshop, a class if you will, on Dungeons & Dragons and role-playing games in general. For those of you out there that have never played before, for those of you who have played and want to pick up some new skills or ideas, and for many who are out there who have either had hard times dungeon mastering or been too scared to try being a dungeon master or game master, depending on your role-playing game of choice, we're going to try and dispel some of that and give some tips and tricks along the way. We have Marisha Ray, who plays Keyleth in our usual campaign.
Hello!
We have Taliesin, who plays Percy in our campaign.
Greetings. Hello.
We have Orion, who plays Tiberius in our campaign.
Good evening, everyone.
And the birthday boy, Liam O'Brien.
Oh, hi!
Birthday!
We have Dan Casey.
Hello.
Dan Casey.
How you doing?
Dan Casey, everybody.
Casey, Casey.
Calling
Casey
around
in the
Dan
house.
Casey in the house.
Dan Casey.
Wait, Dan Casey. There we go.
We have in the middle here, dressed so eloquently, our fantastic overlord, Zach Eubank.
I am the Snuggle Lord! There have been none before me, and there will be none after. I am the Snuggle Lord.
It has been decreed.
Hey, I'm Iffy Waddiway. You guys know me from Mulligan. Also do stand-up comedy, acting.
We're going to start here with a little overview of character creation. So, for most RPGs, especially those in the fantasy realm, this will be a very familiar aspect, but there are many different game types that run different things. But usually the point goes, you choose a race and you choose a class. The race defines your physical background, your family bloodline, and what attributes that adds to you. A class is essentially the job or the way you've lived your life going forward and what skills you've acquired because of it. So this is like the dwarf, whom I love. Dwarves are awesome, underrepresented. Dwarves are cool. They're sturdy. They're strong. They're a little brash. We have elves. Elves, you know elves. Lord of the Rings, elves are cool. They have high elves, which are a little more haughty and well-learned. We have wood elf, there we go, which are more of the Legolas style, you know, in the woods hunting, being stealthy. And then you have the dark elves, which are the drow, that are from actually the Underdark, where you guys have been fighting through, though you've not encountered any drow in the Underdark. There are also halflings, which you could say hobbit, but I think the Dungeons & Dragons version of halflings are a little more awesome, butt-kicking, a little less, I just want to stay home and make little farm animals. You got humans, which are cool and well-rounded, all across the board. You got Dragonborn, which have dragon bloodlines, like Tiberius over here. Like a breath weapon, they're strong, charismatic. You have gnomes, which we have 2 gnomes in our campaign. They're the smallest of all the races. They're also probably the most nimble and the most naturally resistant against magic types. You also have half-elves, which we have quite a few in our campaign. Happened through some drunken evening between a human and an elf.
Sick.
Get a little bit of both sides. Then you have the half-orc, which is half human, half orc. Generally a much larger, stronger, quicker to anger, ready for battle type. And then you have the tieflings, who are humanoid, but have somewhere in their previous bloodline some contact with demonic forces that left them with some essence of the hells in their bloodline. So like horns, tails, yellow eyes. Think Nightcrawler from X-Men. That's kind of what a tiefling would look like, possibly with the horns.
I think a new one is the Jinn. Like there's like a Jinn race. Like there's like an air, a water, and a fire, and an earth elemental.
Like an evil genie?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Like the new
Awesome Jinn.
expansion.
Right.
Like
And of course,
the Jinns.
we also have the Goliaths, which are half giants. We're not going to be worried about that tonight, because those are in the new Elemental Evil Edition. That's what Grog is. But they're really big, strong guys. Classes we got. So, we got Barbarian. Grog is a great example of Barbarian. Big, hardy warrior types that shun armor for just pure aggression and anger. They use rage as a means of destroying their foes, upping their abilities in combat, and preventing mental effects magically affecting them. We have bards. Bards are vastly skilled across the board. They have skills of all types, even things they don't know very well. They know a little bit of everything, kind of a jack of all trades. They have some minor spell casting. They also can inspire other people with song, speech, and help them out with certain skill checks. Bards are pretty cool. We got clerics, your healers. But you say healer, like, oh, I don't want to be a healer. Clerics also have access to really powerful divine magic, so while people may feel, oh, clerics are dumb, you heal the party, they can also call down divine judgment, which is great.
Also, having a healer is really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Druids also have some healing capabilities. They also have more nature-based magics. They're cool and they control nature. And can turn into beasts and creatures like that.
Giant scorpions.
Indeed. We have fighters. Fighters are just straight up fighters. Imagine what a fighter is. That's a fighter. They can use all armor and all weapons. They can generally get more attacks than other classes. They're generally like the martial, the generals, the warriors, the pit fighters. They're just more rough and tumble. Let's just damage each other. We've got monks. Monks, crazy fast, punch and do awesome damage with their bare fists. They can avoid things. They can do multiple hits per round. They can use key points to inflict different types of attacks. Monks are basically, if you want to be Ip Man in the middle of a D&D campaign, pick a monk. You have paladins, bastion of good and right in the world. Paladins stand for law and wonder, and if anyone proves themselves evil, they will be destroyed and smited by the divine energies of their god. So they're generally pretty pious. They fight for good. They fight for the underdog. They can
Just like Zach perk up there.
Yeah.
They have good fighting abilities. They can wear and use most armor and weapons, but they also get a little bit of divine cleric-based magic, and they can heal with a touch.
Total Boy Scouts.
Yeah. Got rangers, which is what Laura's character, Vexalia, is. They have good either two-weapon or ranged combat. They can pick a companion animal if they want to. It's how Trinket came about. Definitely the Legolas of Lord of the Rings type. Arrow, everything's getting arrows. Arrow! And we got rogues, which is what Liam plays in our game. Rogues are all about stealth, stabbing in the back, finding weak points in their enemies and doing serious damage with precision strikes by distracting their enemies and finding where their weak points are. They generally don't have a lot of hit points or defenses, but if they can get in there sneakily, they'll do some serious damage. Then we got Sorcerer, which Tiberius is, which is a magical caster, arcane based. Whereas a wizard is more of the classic wizard you see with giant spell books, learning and Harry Potter style classes and that kind of that learned magical ability. Sorcerers have it innately in their blood from their bloodline somehow, and their casting ability is kind of like an improvised thing they just learned and are good at. So imagine more of a less learned, less controlled wizard that mostly understands some magic naturally. Mm-hmm. Whereas the wizard is the well-learned spell book type, more studious, have a larger breadth of spells to pick from. But the sorcerer is a little more improvised and can use points to instill power with it. Last but not least, we got a warlock. Warlocks are magical practitioners who draw their magic from making a pact with some otherworldly entity. It can be like demons or the Nine Hells, and they draw more hellfire and infernal type magics. They can make a pact with dark fae, which are basically like creepy Oberon-style, fairy elf people from Midsummer Night's Dream, or the great old ones, like Cthulhu. Hi, Cthulhu, give me magic. What could possibly go wrong? Mm-hmm. Those are the warlocks. So those are primarily your classes. You get to pick. You choose a race and you choose a class. You guys have some ideas yet of what you might want to play tonight?
Oh, most definitely.
Oh, yeah.
100%. I'm going to be a dwarven rogue.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Rogue Tumblr.
I am the Snuggle Lord. I am a warlock tiefling. And I derive my powers from all holy overlord of Geek and Sundry.
Okay.
The evil overlord.
That would fall under
Just
infernal.
feeling really meta.
I'm gonna be Ulfgar Fireforge, fighter, dwarf, two-handed swordsman, cut your face off, take your money. AKA true neutral.
Oh.
Neutral.
Oh.
Do it.
This is going to be a very fun short game.
We got this! What are you
Never
talking
made it out of
about?
that first tavern.
Let's go ahead and roll out some stats for you. So what you do to decide what your attributes are for your characters, that basically says how strong they are, how hardy their physicality is, how fast they are. And you have strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. And those are the 6 stats. So for you guys, if you want to go ahead and take... There are different ways of rolling stats. Some people do a point-buy system where you start with a certain base stat and you can buy based on points. For this, we're going to use my favorite system to do, which is you roll 4d6.
Oh, my favorite
Lowest,
too.
a range is desired. There are different dice values in the game. You have a d4, which is a 4-sider dice. So it's a little caltrop, painful to step on. You got a d6, your typical 6-sided dice. D8, which is a little more pointy, that's an 8-sider. You got a 10-sider, which comes in 2 varieties. Regular, or additional numbers. This is if you're doing percentage rolls, you know what the percentile dice numbers are. Pardon me. a D12, which is only really used if you're a barbarian, apparently. It's the saddest and the redheaded stepchild of D&D. And the D20, which is the most used dice in the game. Most all decisions are based on a 20-sided dice. We'll get into that in a little bit. So once you have your stats arranged from that point, you can start going to your characters. And we're going to go ahead and just make level 2 characters, relatively simple. Have a hit point value as well. You'll be able to roll how many hit points you have. Everyone starts with, at level 1, max hit point value. For the rogue, we have a D8. So you start at 8 hit points.
Oh boy, I'm gonna roll again.
And you roll 1d8 to add to that for level 2. Stats, 10 is average, and then every 2 above a 10 creates a modifier. So like at 12, that stat has a +1 modifier. At 14, it's a +2. At 16, it's a +3, 18 a +4, and so on. And what that modifier is it's the bonus you get to any ability or attempt you make towards something that falls under that stats category. Like you're trying to break through a door, you'd roll a d20 and add your strength. You know, or if you're trying to, like a lot of the reflex saving or the dexterity saving throws based off your dexterity, you would roll d20 and add what your modifier would be for your dexterity. So those modifiers based on your stat are what affect your d20 rolls for most everything you do in the game. But everyone should be at a proficiency bonus of +2. A section for skills, and it'll say which skills you're proficient in under proficiencies. And I'll have you choose a few. I think for now, if you guys want to go over and help them get their classes a little underway of getting the minutiae of that building process, I'm going to jump into the next section. The role of a dungeon master or game master in this. So there are a number of things that you are required to be when it comes to dungeon mastering. Largely, your goal is to be a fair judge. You take all the actions and the activities and the intent and the phrases that the players do, and you judge whether or not it was a good attempt or a bad attempt and modify a difficulty based on it. Basically, for most things that are actively a challenge in the game, you as the dungeon master decide how difficult it is given the circumstance. If it's a really, really weak door someone's trying to kick through, like the door has been dilapidated and rotting, you might say it's pretty easy, so you give it like a score of 7 to 10 is the difficulty. And then whoever's trying to break it has to roll equal to or higher than that number. If it's an iron reinforced door, that's going to be a much higher number. So a lot of what you're doing is you're judging how difficult a challenge currently is versus what a player is trying to do. And then based on if it succeeds or not, you tell the players what the consequences are of the circumstance. Really low rolls can make for some hilarious botches. Really awesome rolls can make for some great heroic moments. Rationalizing the world around them. Now what I say about that is when they encounter NPCs, which is a non-player character, anyone that's not controlled by the players, and they have a conversation, or they do something in front of them, that non-player character is going to have a reaction. So you, as the dungeon master or game master, you decide based on what they've done or what they've said, the personality of the character that you're playing, how they would react to that circumstance, favorably, unfavorably. And so a lot of your experience as dungeon master is rationalizing that relationship back and forth. If they're a really charismatic character that reads the NPC well and kind of sees that maybe they dress well, maybe they like a lot of money, and so they open the conversation about money and how they can be paid, that's going to be a very favorable reaction. So if they're trying to convince the NPC to do something, you might consider a relatively low difficulty. If it's a progressive conversation and the player keeps bungling their words or rolling poorly throughout the conversation, that difficulty might get higher and higher by the end of the conversation for them to finally convince them to do something. So you're constantly gauging how well they're doing in a social encounter versus how easy it is for the NPC to believe what they're saying. Also, you'll find challenges that are conflicting or versus, where the player rolls versus an NPC. An example of that would be someone trying to deceive somebody, to lie to somebody versus their insight. And so what you do is the player, if they're trying to lie to an NPC, they'd go ahead and roll, add their deception skill, and then me as the dungeon master, or you as the dungeon master, would roll a d20, add that NPC's insight skill, and if you haven't decided one, you can make one up on the spot based on how insightful you think that NPC might be, and compare the two. If they lose, they probably believe the player. If they win, they don't, and it's your decision whether or not they want to show that card or go along with it secretly knowing that they're lying and then have that bite them in the ass later on. So you want to be a fair judge and rationalize the world around them and how NPCs react to what they're doing. One of the biggest aspects of being a game master or dungeon master, in my opinion, is understanding that you're here to tell a story, and you're here to allow the players to be heroes. The reason you play this game is you want that heroic journey. And there are many people that enjoy games that are very versus, very conflicting, and very like Dungeon Master versus players, trying to kill them, they're trying to survive. And that's totally fine too. Just make sure up front, you and the players discuss what kind of game you want to play. Nothing's worse than having a player sign on board, make characters, get a few sessions in, and realize that they're now locked into a campaign that is very aggressive and very fight to survive versus what they wanted was a very plain, happy, fantasy experience. So make sure that you're very open with your players at the get-go what kind of campaign you want to run. In my opinion, it's the most fulfilling if it's a collaborative experience where you provide challenges, you provide difficulty, you provide high stakes, and there is that threat of death, but you never want the players to feel like you're working against them. You want to be kind of an impartial judge and be firm but fair. Which is why it's so scary sometimes when they get close to a TPK, because I set it up a certain way, they play it a certain way, and you let the dice fall as it does. Or in some cases it works in their favor, like a long-standing boss fight you prepared a lot that they happen to roll really well on and kill your beholder. Totally fine. Good for them. In that same vein, you want to reward good thinking, guile, and good in-character actions and role-playing, and punish reckless against character behavior. A good example was Pike. As a cleric early in the game, she was, beginning to be a little cruel. And, while she is a war cleric, and combat and battle is not unfamiliar to her, cruelty was, and unnecessary cruelty began to fall into a negative point of favor with her deity, Sarenrae, causing the holy symbol to begin to crack, and we're kind of seeing where that's going to play out down the road. Conversely, if someone does something really cool in character, or something that really kind of changes the dynamic, or has everyone else at the table going like, whoa, that's really great, and maybe you want to reward them with an inspiration dice, which is, if you guys have seen the inspiration mechanics, you can lend inspiration dice to players, which allows them to give a bonus to one of the rolls they make. Our bard Scanlan can give those out as an ability, but you as the DM can also give those out if someone does something really cool. And if someone does something really risky, but really crazy dynamic, even if it seems near impossible, let them try. Let the players try things that are crazy. They might have a really low chance of working, and they'll fail spectacularly, and those will still make for great stories and great memories in that game. So, let the players be heroes, present them with challenges, reward them for good in-character decisions, and trying to track them from making out-of-character decisions that take and rob the fun from the other players as well. I mean, everyone can play as they want to, and if you're running an evil campaign or you have an evil character in a game that's like starting to undermine the rest of the party, that can be interesting as long as all the players understand and are down with that type of experience. Once again, that's the conversation you have at the beginning about what everyone's trying to get out of the game. One of the other larger jobs is you build the world. So as a dungeon master, you want to be a fair judge, you want to rationalize the world around them, you want to try and make sure the players have the opportunity to be heroes and have those heroic moments, reward them for doing good, cool things, trying to track them from ruining other people's fun or doing things that are out of character, and build a world for them to play in. In any RPG book, there are many rules about how to do combat, how to do social interactions, and you can read up on that. You can play these by the book, completely as they are inside, and it's a great rule system, it works really well. But everything in here, in all these books, are guidelines. Anything can be changed, anything can be altered, anything can be customized to how you want it to be. If you don't like how movement or actions work in the game, you can change it however you see fit. And just notify the players that's the case, of course, otherwise they might feel a little, taken advantage of if they don't understand the changes you made. But you can change and alter anything you want in the game. The bottom line is, as a dungeon master, as a game master, it's your world. Your word is law. People can't really argue with you unless it's a rules question that you didn't clarify before, in which case you kind of have to go in the favor of the player if it's something you didn't clarify. But for the most part, you play the part of the overall god of this world, and players also have to respect that what you say goes. That's kind of that weird dynamic between the players and the DM. It's a respect mechanic. You don't want the players to lose respect for you, because then they stop, well, partially enjoying it, but also they start feeling that antagonistic relationship, which can be a little stressful for both points. A large part of the DM's time is spent world building. I say world building, it's creating all the little details and the aspects of the world you want the players to play in. There are parts of that like creating a society, building towns and villages, designing dungeons and encounters, and all that crazy stuff all comes together into that world that you're creating. But you want to start somewhere, and it seems very daunting as a dungeon master, especially a new one, to say, how do I create all this? Where do I start? And that's a difficult question. Sometimes for your first couple games, it doesn't hurt to look at a module. Go out and pick up one of the existing Dungeons & Dragons adventure books that outlines for you how a city would be built, how NPCs would be built, and how they would play out and respond to certain circumstances. It's a good way to train yourself to see how that process would look when it's finished. So if you decide to create your own campaign or customize aspects, you know where to build off of. If you're building your own world, I'd recommend starting with a small society, a small village or a small town. And you're like, okay, I'm gonna build a small town. Where's this town gonna be? What's the topography? You're like, okay, well, it can be like in the middle of a forest village. I mean, more natural based kind of farmer society, or it can be your archetypical urban environment with a very thriving trade society, a mercantile run, people. It could be a port town that sees a lot of trade, but also has that kind of travel aspect. It's a mixing pot of cultures. Or it could be just a small farm town that's constantly under siege. But you want to start with some bastion of civilization, some place where the players can meet other characters, find adventure, find quests, and find conflict. As an example, we'll say this is, we'll use the first town they started in the campaign, Stillben. Stillben I built as a swamp town. It is a port town, but it's built in this clutch center portion of a large swamp to the far east of that continent. So you're like, okay, it's a swamp town. How big is it? You think about it, you're like, how many people do you think live there? Then you start breaking down into what factions there might be in that city. Is there a thieves guild or an element of shadow in the town? Is there a merchant guild? Is there a builder's guild? Is there a sailor's guild? Think of what type of work would be available in this town. You don't have to worry about fleshing out every single member of the thieves guild, but consider like 2 or 3 main NPCs that might be part of that thieves guild. So you can say, all right, one of them will be, we'll say a female tiefling who's good with longswords. Come up with a random name. You can look up online for random NPC name generators. What about her, aside from being good with longswords, is a dynamic aspect of her personality? Well, is she ornery? Is she very sly and charismatic? Is she the kind of person that lets everyone else do the dirty work and just stays in the shadows? Or does she like to be kind of the face man of the Thieves Guild? You kind of just decide some sort of a personality aspect to her of those or many other types. Then you think, and this is one thing that I think every NPC you should write down some aspect of. What do they want? And what do they fear? You can make a shit ton of really simple NPCs with just the information of their name, what race and class they are, what they want, and what they fear. And that's all you really need to branch out any conversation or encounter they go through. Everything else can be improvised on the spot. Like I said, it's all reactionary as a DM, which is great, because once you set the world, the players drive the story, and you just react off what they're doing and rationalize how the world would react to it. And you can railroad it as much as you want to. If you don't want to spend a lot of time building a big sandbox game for all your players, you can play a pretty standard, straightforward story. You can decide the players are going to go to this tavern, the players are going to go to this this home here, they're going to go to this one mercantile, this kind of textile warehouse where they're going to find a hidden underground passage that leads to an altar, to some forgotten god. You don't want to deny the players too much, because you're all in this for that storytelling experience, and they want to feel like they're guiding their own path. If you force them too hard against their wishes in the game, then it feels more like the DM is playing the game than the players are, and that becomes a very tenuous relationship going forward in a campaign. The cool note is the players never know whether or not you're bullshitting or you had it all planned. So even if you go off the rails, as long as you have some notes or are at least acting like you know what you're talking about, for the most part you'll be fine. Then consider villains. Villains are NPCs that inherently have very selfish goals that are detrimental to society at large and or the players. Kavarn being the big bad of the recent arc, he is definitively one of the main villains, not the main villain of this arc. You can create villains that are kind of one-offs like this. They eventually found Kavarn and they killed him. You can create villains that are long-standing and recurring. Like earlier in the campaign, the Dread Emperor was always present, but they didn't even manage to find him until the very end, but was a recurring theme throughout to kind of build that tension about that villain. And not all villains get killed. Some villains, when they're damaged, they get the heck out of Dodge and return later, even more prepared and more ready, you know? But sometimes the players will be clever and keep them in there, and don't deny the players if they're really smart and prevent your villain from escaping when he tries to. Because you don't want to, you want to reward the players for being really smart. Remember, good villains are also very smart, and usually have a pretty strong exit strategy if everything goes to shit. Story hooks. Story hooks are essentially what gets the players to start seeking the story. And there's a lot of great examples in the Dungeon Master's Guide here, if you guys pick up a copy. When they enter a tavern, they notice that someone in the corner is hunched over and eventually falls forward off their stool. The party goes and inspects and finds out that they've been stabbed and are bleeding out. And their dying words, as they reach out to the player, they whisper a name. Like, oh, shit, that name, what does that mean? And someone in the room's like, that name, that's the name of the leader of this one temple of Pelor, the god of the sun, the god of light. Okay, well, the players now have the idea that someone got murdered and their last words were the name of this person. Let's go find out what their relationship was. That's a story hook. Another thing I wanted to bring up with you guys was encounters. So when you do get into battle, or when players encounter creatures or monsters or villain characters and they want to fight, you think, where are they? Are they fighting in a dungeon? Are they fighting in a forest? Are they fighting in a swamp? Are they fighting in an open plain? And you go through a book like the Dungeon Masters, or the Monster Manual, and find creatures that you think would live in that type of topography. So if they're in an open field, you can think of more wild beasts, or maybe clans of roaming orcs. If they're in deep mountains, you can find creatures that burrow and naturally live in more earthy-based terrain, and you build encounters around that. There are some really great websites online that have encounter calculators where you can basically tell how difficult an encounter is based on how many players are in the party, what level they are, and you can build the encounter based on that. That way you don't end up accidentally making something that's too difficult or too easy for the party. And you don't want to make everything too hard. Some battles can be fun and easy and really kind of have the players enjoy being badass and rushing into combat and just killing things really easily and being, haha, I ruined everything. That's great. I'm powerful. Then you can have some battles that are pretty, whew, that was close. That was a good fight. And then occasionally you want to throw them a curveball and have something they really have to struggle through. So when they finish that battle, they really have to take rest and realize we almost lost one or more people in that fight. And that makes the stakes that much higher at that point. And consider terrain for combat too. Not every battle is just you versus monsters. Sometimes there's a big cliff involved and the battle could be at a distance. Sometimes there's pits of lava in the middle that becomes a danger or a tool depending on how you look at it during the battle. Sometimes, especially in urban combat, you have rooftops and alleyways in which you can use that to your advantage to avoid things or push guys off a roof to fall and get hurt or fall onto things, you know? There can be traps involved that you know are there that you can then push guys into. There's a really cool way of building encounters that are beyond just hitting things and doing damage, which is fine too, don't get me wrong. Also, if there's a monster in the monster manual that you like, you're like, this is a really cool monster, but it's too easy. Like the players are all level 10 and this is a level 3 monster. You can customize the monster. You can make the monster more powerful, add more hit points, raise the stats a little more, give it a couple of unique attacks that you think would be fitting for it. If you don't like the fact that the bullet only really has like a bite and a stomp attack, maybe you decide that this bullet actually grew up or was raised around some sort of arcane, natural arcane relic that infused it with a resistance to magic and the capability that it has like electrical charges around it. And now whenever anyone starts their turn next to it, they get shocked. It's an electric bullet. That's kind of cool. Why not? You can customize and alter any aspect of any creature in the book. Once again, all guidelines. You can go with the basis here, and it's a lot easier if you don't have a lot of time. But don't be afraid to customize and alter things to fit certain aspects of your world or your story as you see fit. So, all guidelines you can customize as you see fit. And there are great communities online of people that create creatures and beasts and have suggestions or feedback for anything you create. Don't be afraid to reach out there. Once again, I apologize. This is a lot of information up front, but trying to squeeze this in for you. Also, maps. You see in Critical Role, we do combat with maps that we draw up of terrain, and everyone has individual models, and the creatures have models. That is not necessary. I've found it's very helpful for our campaign because we have 8 players. which makes it very difficult for everyone to keep in mind spatial awareness during the battle, who's who and what they're doing and how close monsters are. I grew up playing Dungeons & Dragons and other RPGs without maps or models at all. It was all theater of the mind, all in the brain, which is a lot of fun. But when you get a certain critical mass of players, it becomes unwieldy. So the models became necessary for us. But what we're doing tonight, when we play our game, it's going to be no battlefield, no models. It's all going to be just keeping it in your head and me letting you know what's happening and where you guys are. So don't feel like it's absolutely necessary to do that. I just find it makes it easier when you have more players. And it's fun to draw maps. Sometimes it's a lot of fun to do that. Another question that's come up a lot, experience points. So, monsters that are killed or defeated in battle give you experience points. They don't necessarily have to be killed to get that experience points. The players still win the encounter, meaning they force them to surrender, or they manage to fight them to the point where they have to retreat. That is still a victory, and the players should still get the experience for that encounter. You may give them a bonus if it's a big boss fight and they killed it and they get to reap the rewards of it. That's cool. That's totally up to you as a DM. What about role-playing experience? That's arbitrary based on what you want to do as a DM. You can just write down, well, that's cool. They get 500 experience for that social encounter. You can make it up on the spot. It's an endeavor with 8 players. So what I do is I have what I call a hatch marks system, where whenever anybody does something in the game that is a cool role-playing experience, or they save a circumstance, I'll give them a hatch mark next to their name, or multiple hatch marks if it was really, really clutch and really kind of changed the dynamic of the circumstance and saved their bacon. Or if they failed miserably at something, but they gave it a really, really good try and it was a cool idea, I might still give them a hatch mark or 2 because it was a good shot. And so at the end of each game, I have an equation for myself where I multiply their level by 25. So right now they're all level 10, it would be 250 experience. And I give them that many, I multiply it by the number of hatch marks they get. So if somebody gets 3 hatch marks in a game right now, they would get an additional 750 experience points at the end of that session based on their role-playing experience. So that way I don't have to think too much about the math in the game. I just go, that's cool, hatch mark. Or, that was really cool, hatch mark, hatch mark, hatch mark. And then at the end of each session, I'll go ahead and multiply the level by 25, and then multiply that by how many hatch marks I've given them, and that's their total role-playing experience. That's worked well for me. It's not for everyone. So, as I said, I hope it's a lot of information for you guys, but dungeon mastering, it's a lot of fun. It takes some time. You have to kind of set aside some time. I say generally it takes about an hour of gameplay per hour of preparation. So if it's going to be a 6-hour session, it might take anywhere from 3 to 6 hours to set up for that properly, but it doesn't have to be that long. That's just me being super thorough, which I'm obsessive about. Be open to improvise, be open to let the players play and let them guide you sometimes in an off direction, and have fun. Let the players be heroes, let them try anything. Just know that if what they're trying is really ridiculous, they have a really, really low chance of succeeding. And most of the time they'll fail, and it's a spectacular failure and you'll all laugh about it. If they succeed that roll, that is an epic fucking moment that you're all gonna remember because that player pulled off that third act amazing maneuver that completely changed the dynamic of the story. And that's really what this game's all about.